Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright. Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the New Jersey Psychological Association's podcast, which is The Power of the Spoken Word. This is the place where you can find everything about psychology and about psychologists. And our podcast is created as a resource for everyone who lives, loves, plays, and works in New Jersey. So today, I want to talk about, for a lot of us who are in practice, we're really thinking deeply about how to thrive during and after COVID. So one of the things that we want to do is sort of introduce a panel of guests who can be a resource for us, along with our lovely DPA again, Susan. So I'm going to introduce everybody. So Dr. Susan Mcgrady, she's an associate adjunct professor at Rosen School of Medicine and director of behavioral medicine. Prior to joining Rosen, she was a tenured adjunct professor at Chestnut Hill College, doctoral program in clinical psychology. And she is currently our director of professional affairs for the New Jersey Psychological Association. Dr. Mcgrady loves paddleboarding and in the warm weather spends paddling and exploring the bays and inlets around Ocean City, New Jersey. We're also joined by Mark Twentyman. He's the president of Kingbridge Realty Advisors, and he exclusively represents tenants and buyers of commercial real estate across New Jersey. In this role, he saves his clients both time and money by representing their best interests in identifying suitable options and then in the lease negotiations with the relevant landlords. He has over 30 years of experience in the industry, and his service covers lease renewals, relocations, expansions, acquisitions, and also helping startup operations. He is compensated by the landlord, so there is no fee to his clients. Then we have Abigail Abbie Rosen. She's a certified financial planner, professional with over 10 years of experience in the financial industry. Prior to her career in finance, Abbie was an officer in the United States Navy. Abbie is responsible for managing client relationships and coordinating all aspects of client services for the team. Abbie specializes in working with corporate executives to help them take full advantage of their available benefits, implement in respect to employer stock concentrations, and manage their stock option strategies. She graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts from the College of Holy Cross and received a Master's of Science in Financial Planning from Bentley University. She's the treasurer of our New Jersey Psychological Association Foundation and treasurer of the Harding Township Educational Foundation. She's also a Brownie troop leader. I thought that was nice. We're joined by Joe Graff. He's a certified public accountant and a partner of Ross, Rosenthal and Company in Morristown. Joe has more than 30 years of tax and accounting experience with industry specialization, including real estate, energy, and professional services. His expertise lies in the fields of capital transactions, estate planning, tax planning, and litigation support. Joe serves as a trustee and advisor to a family office. He also served as an expert witness and a court-appointed special fiscal agent trustee. He joined Ross Rosenthal in 1981 and became managing partner in 2007. He began his career on the audit staff of Price Waterhouse. He is treasurer of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation for Morristown Medical Center. Joe holds a master's degree in taxation from Pace University and is a licensed certified public accountant in New Jersey and New York. We're also joined by Rich Bell. He's on audio today. And Rich is Vice President and Business Development Officer Team Leader with Spencer Savings Bank. He's responsible for leading and managing a team of business development officers tasked with developing new commercial deposits, lending, and cash management relationships. He also has extensive experience with 1031 exchanges. Rich Bell is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy and served more than 15 years as as a Marine Corps officer. He attained the rank of major and is also a graduate of the Marine Corps Command and Staff College in Quantico, Virginia. He served in Operation Sharp Edge in Liberia and in the Gulf War. Rich helps his fellow veterans network and find employment when they return home through his LinkedIn group, Jobs for Veterans. Rich lives with his family in Huntington County, New Jersey. So I want to thank everybody first and foremost for joining us. And I feel like we're surrounded by some really high-powered and smart individuals who can help our members kind of think through some of these tough questions. I know a lot of people have already talked about loss of income as an issue, have talked about how they may have to think through lease options, are thinking about what relationships they can have with some of the federal initiatives and also with their banks. And people are thinking about their retirements, being impacted, particularly for some of our older members who are like, I was planning on leaving sooner than later, and now we're thinking about what that looks like. So we're really interested in getting feedback and really leaning in on your expertise. And I want to set this conversation up because I heard this economic term that really struck me by Joseph Schumpeter, where he describes creative destruction as the process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. Creative destruction theory treats economics as an organic and dynamic process. Creative destruction is a process through which something new brings about the demise of whatever existed before. And they said it's used in economics, corporate governance, product development, technology, and marketing. And I think since we're going through this pandemic, we're in this phase where people have to start thinking about that things aren't the same, that we're all in this new normal, and then how do we access and tap into other resources, particularly our financial resources and banking relationship, our real estate resources to help think through some different options. So my first question is to everybody. And it's really based on your observations, what are the common struggles for business owners during this pandemic? And I'll start with Abbie, and we'll just go round robin.
Thanks, Daniel. I'd say the number one issue I've seen with business owners is trying to run their business as well as stay up to date on all the new regulations, stimulus packages, government benefits available. Running a business is hard enough, and then when you have to wade through all of these options available, I think it becomes really, really difficult for people, and they want to stay afloat. They want to stay in business, and just trying to understand all the changes is really difficult. So that's the thing I've seen is the number one issue.
Okay. Rich, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks very much for letting me join. I think Abbie is spot on with that. I think a lot of people may have been a little unprepared, and I think it's so important to maintain relationships with your financial planner, your CPA, your attorney, your banker. So if things do head in a bad direction, you already have a group of people that you can turn to for help.
Okay, great. Joe, what thoughts do you have?
Well, one is working with technology remotely, for sure, as we're seeing right now. But also getting back to something that Rich said about maintaining relationships with your advisors. One thing a lot of my clients found when they were applying for the PPP loans was that depending on which bank they were dealing with, if it was a large bank, a lot of times there would not be much of a relationship. And I think what myself and a lot of my clients found was that, your local New Jersey bank is much more likely to have people in place right there in the branch that are more than willing to help. So that was certainly a lesson learned.
Okay, that's true. I'll go to Susan, then we'll come back to Mark. So Susan, what have you noticed?
I think all the problems that my colleagues on this call have mentioned, but in addition, for psychologists, dealing with the myriad of insurance company and federal and local regulatory problems that come up with telehealth, which all changed in March, and doing that at the same time that they're managing a mental health pandemic for themselves and for their clients and their families. I think it's an enormous challenge.
I agree. I'm going to circle back to Mark. Any luck with the sound, Mark? All right, so we're going to see if Mark jumps back on. We need to mute. Oh, Ming, I don't know if you can mute yourself. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. So while we're waiting for Mark to jump on, let's talk about some of the financial kind of questions and issues that are popping up. A lot of members are talking about loss of income as a big, sort of concern for them. And then even questions about retirement. So I'm curious about what strategies and insights that people can offer to help people think about ways to sort of augment maybe the loss, or even thinking about financial planning, or even sort of tax planning. So Joe, let me start with you, then I'll move over to Abbie.
Well, most people are probably familiar with at least the title of the CARES Act that Congress put out in March, and that provided quite a number of benefits. A few minutes ago, I alluded to the PPP loans. PPP stands for Paycheck Protection Program, and that's something that's available even to solo practitioners. It's largely based on your 2019 income, but it can provide a sole practitioner with up to $20,000 in a loan, which chances are would be forgivable under the terms of the program. So that's something that I've worked with a lot of my clients on. Another thing that is new under the law relating to unemployment insurance is that this CARES Act made unemployment available to self-employed people, which it never was before. So a self-employed individual can apply for unemployment in lieu of the PPP loan and get a minimum benefit from the state of a little over $200 a week. Plus, on top of that, this federal program added $600 a week. So someone who's had a significant reduction in income, not necessarily to zero, as a sole practitioner, could apply to New Jersey for unemployment and get a minimum of $800 a week. I should mention with the PPP loan, the deadline to apply is the end of this month, June 30th, and that additional $600 of unemployment benefit, federal unemployment benefit, expires at the end of July. So if they haven't already, time is certainly of the essence.
That's helpful. And before I get to Abbie, I want to jump to Rich and talk about, particularly since everybody's discussing the importance of banking relationships. Could you talk about, as a sort of a private practitioner, or just a professional small business owner in general, what are some things we should be considering when we approach our banks, and how should we approach our bankers, and the banking relationships that we currently have?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that businesses should really learn to leverage their banker. I mean, businesses live and die by their network, right? And I always teach my people to leverage your centers of influence, leverage your network. And you should be leveraging your banker's network. And in addition to providing products and lines of credit and loans and, cash management tools, leverage your banker in terms of, what relationships do they have? How can they help you grow your business? What can they do to add value to what you're trying to achieve? I mean, I think the challenge for these types of businesses is that they work in their business and on their business. They're trying to grow their business, and they're also trying to manage their business and take care of their patients. So it's important that they reach out for help to grow your business.
And I want to follow up with that real quick. So how would you talk to someone who might not be familiar with that process? How would reaching out for help to your banking partner, what would that look like?
I think I would set up a meeting with your banker. I would sit down and say, I'd like to talk to you about, my goals for for the next 1, 3, 5 years, and this is what I'm trying to achieve. And how can you help me? How can you help me do this? And obviously, you need to have a foundation. You need to have the right tax planning, the right financial planning, the right legal documents in place, and then there's the right banking products, lines of credit, loans, cash management tools to make sure you're running your business efficiently. Once you get to that point, you sit down with your banker to say, this is what I'm trying to do. Who do you think I need to meet? How can you get me in front of more people?
Okay, that's really helpful. So Abbie, what additional thoughts do you have?
Sure. So I think what's a little bit different about this recession that we're in is there is a lot of support. So even though it's hard to comb through, it's hard to know exactly the rules, you need the relationships in play, the things like unemployment, the things like the PPP do help buoy a lot of the businesses. So with that said, I would tell the listeners to make sure that don't make any rash decisions. Use this time to make sure you review your insurance. Look at things like home equity lines or business lines of credit. One result of the pandemic is interest rates are really, really low. So that might mean borrowing can be done at a very cheap rate. So that's something to consider. Be creative with your business. I think of something like Boxcar and some of these restaurants who have introduced a little shopping side to make sure that they can stay in business. And I've even seen on my own next door that there's people looking for some mental health services. So expand your business if that's doable. Yeah. Now I know that there's insurance and telehealth issues that Susan can talk more about. But I think this is a really interesting time to get creative, partner with corporations who are looking for mental health services for their employees, partner with your financial people to find out what else is out there. There's been a lot of information about credit card companies and mortgage companies are willing to delay payments. So make those phone calls, use this time at home to do that sort of thing, and look at where there are opportunities. And I would say, again, having a plan in place, whether that's a business continuation plan or a financial plan, a business plan, all of that, now is the time to relook at all of that and think about what you'd want to change.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And I think since you did a good job of segueing to Susan, now what are some considerations? I know you brought up the idea of people struggling with all of the telehealth regulations in addition to some of the insurance changes. So whatever sort of advice or tips would you give folks that think this through from a financial perspective?
I think, Dr. Lee, your concept of creative destruction is really key in this, because I think when there's changes like this, people keep saying, I wanted to go back to the old way. I wanted to go back to the old way. But like Abbie, you point out, ways to be creative in terms of going forward and possibly meeting people where they are. Now, for psychologists, there's a lot of rules and regulations about advertising, but to tap into like what is allowed and be creative, because there's people out there that need us, and how do you connect with the people that need you, so that we can be responsive in this pandemic as well, and that way maybe offset some of the business losses from earlier in this quarter.
Mm-hmm. But building on, I think, Rich, Abbie, and Susan's point, an example I could give is in terms of leveraging your network, and I think it's your network, leveraging your personal network as well and professional. So, for an example, one thing that I've been thinking about in the pandemic is thinking about how you can do more wellness programs with certain groups. So, my wife is a school principal. And I sent a pitch to her union to see if they would want to do a wellness project, and it could be virtual. You just come up with different sort of interventions. But I do feel like I think Abbie made a good point. It's like you have to start thinking differently in terms of how do you get access to those people, and then think about some of the natural relationships that you can have in order to at least get in the door to have conversation. Doesn't mean you're always going to be a yes, kind of figure it out, but you can still use your skills in order to kind of think that through. And even from a business perspective, I sent some information to one of the lenders that I work with that networks with other small businesses to see if other small business owners would need something similar. Because everybody is dealing with the stress of this, not pandemic, now it's a recession, and trying to figure out how to make do, but everybody needs that ability to sort of cope and manage. And I think if we can think about some creative ways to sort of leverage and kind of lean in on people like Rich said, I think that's an opportunity to think and develop new revenue streams in this process. So Mark, do we got you? We got you yet?
Yeah, can you hear me? I don't know.
Yes, you got the floor, my man. So we want to jump in about real estate. So can you talk to us about let's jump back a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the concerns you have or you see out here, and then maybe what are some of the solutions, particularly in the area of real estate?
Okay, obviously, in the terms of the real estate, most of my clients are having the challenge of having legal occupation of their space, but not beneficial occupation of their space, and that's been quite a challenge. And the reality is that it's probably going to remain a challenge in the pandemic because one of the big issues is now, anyway, how do people go back to work safely, not only for themselves or employees and their clients, but also to make sure that their business is protected. Because if somebody were to claim that they got infected by being in your office, then potentially there's a liability claim, and there's no insurance out there right now to cover it. And just having a waiver signed, it'd be on my experience feedback from clients, just having a waiver signed saying, I acknowledge I'm coming into your space and I may contact the virus, but I can't sue you, is not going to cut it legally. So folks need to be getting some advice from their attorney in terms of how best they can protect themselves. Because typically the catch-all is follow CDC guidelines and you'll be fine. Well, the CDC guidelines are probably 6 inches thick. So, the reality is a smart lawyer could probably find some way of making sure you could get sued potentially. So that's the biggest concern right now, is getting back into the space, and then how do you use it once you're there?
And so what are some of the solutions do you offer folks in this position? Particularly, I like your point about how people have the legal sort of right, but not the benefit of it. So how should people manage that, particularly if they're paying some large fees in terms of lease expenses?
Well, it's a little bit of a challenge. Everyone, of course, went to their leases originally to see if there was any force majeure clauses that they could somehow utilize to stop paying rent. But the reality is the leases that most people have signed, virtually everybody, in fact, don't cover the situation. So at the moment, people are legally obligated to pay the rent. On that point, maybe going forward, if there's a new lease you're entering into in the next year or two going forward, then maybe you could try and get some clause inserted that covers you if it ever were to happen again. But the reality is, if you're sort of like IBM or something like that, or Accenture, you can probably got some leverage in the negotiations for that opportunity to make the change. If you're a smaller type of client or solo practitioner, the answer is probably not. So right now, the best you could do is probably go forward to enter into a discussion with the landlord to see if you could come to an accommodation that's a win-win for everybody in terms of getting some kind of rent deferment. Rent abatement is probably not going to happen, but a rent deferment could potentially be of help.
Okay. And could you talk a little bit about how people should go about having those types of conversations?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
Could you talk a little bit about how people should go about kind of bringing up those conversations with their landlord?
Well, obviously, it's to reach out, but with a plan. I mean, it's not much. It's not going to be very helpful just ringing up the landlord and telling them, look, our business is in trouble. I'm not paying the rent. that's not going to be a win-win conversation. So what one needs to do is think about with your advisors, your advisory team, in terms of what it is you want to try and get out of the landlord that could be a win-win. And usually, in my experience over the last 3 or 4 months, that has been going to speak to the landlord to see if they could give you some rent deferment over a few months. You'll pay that back over a specified period of time. Or ultimately, if you're close, you could try and restructure the lease, and maybe you give the landlord a little bit of extra lease term in so that he might give you a little bit of a rent concession today.
Okay. Go, Susan. Oh, you gotta unmute.
I have a question for Mark, because we've had many members with questions about leases. So say I rent an office in a building, and my client comes through a common space owned by the landlord and then to my office. And I'm like really circumspect about protecting my office, but then the patient catches coronavirus. What would be their like exposure to risk from that? How do you mitigate that? I don't know if you know anything about that, but that question has come up.
Well, it's a good question, because obviously there will be shared responsibility. As a tenant, you want to ask the landlord what procedures and processes they are putting in place. Maybe it's extra cleaning, or every night or something, or wherever it may be, to try and mitigate any impact of the virus. And some landlords have a plan, some have no plan. So if your landlord has no plan, you might want to encourage them to do so. Ultimately, look, this is a win-win. The landlords aren't bad guys. Everyone's, caught off by this virus. So it's got to be a win-win, really. But you're right to point out that the landlord's going to be doing something too, because in the common areas, if it, in theory, when it gets to litigation, probably beyond my remit, they follow the money. If the landlord's got the most money, that's where they're going. If you've got the most money because you've got a great practice going, you're going to be the one that they'll go to first, and then you'll have to go back to the landlord if you can. So it would be a bit of a mess.
Mark, can I ask you another question?
Sure.
So some of our members buy and sell commercial real estate. Like they own the building that they practice. Do you have any thoughts about the timing right now? Like, is it a buyer's market for commercial real estate? Is there an opportunity here?
There are many factors playing into this, I guess, right? Right now, interest rates obviously are extremely low, so it could be a good time to buy from that perspective. On the flip side, because of the uncertainty in the general business climate, some people are holding back a little bit to see how things develop, shall we say.
Okay.
So I guess it's there's pros and cons both ways at the moment. There's no definitive answer. Time will tell. On the residential market, a lot of people now seem to be coming out of New York, going into the suburbs, bringing forward their plans a little bit early. And in the real estate side too, we're starting to see certain firms wanting to move out of New York because they want to have satellite offices. Getting to work by public transportation is a concern right now. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 6-12 months in terms of that really impacts real estate decisions.
Abbie, did you have some thoughts? I wasn't sure.
Oh, I'm just nodding my head about the real estate. I think it's, as Mark mentioned, it's a little too soon to tell. There's pros and cons to both sides of it on the commercial side.
Okay. And I'm going to shift back to Joe and Rich, since we're talking about the real estate piece, particularly if we're looking at the CARES program and PPP and those resources. Could you talk to sort of the listeners about how those resources could help them with sort of lease expenses, rent, and some of those other sort of real estate transactions?
Yeah, sure, Daniel. I actually wanted to mention that with the discussions of paying rent, one of the purposes of this PPP forgivable loan is specifically to cover rent, utilities. Utilities can include your cell phone. Rent can include not only office space, but copiers and auto lease, any leases that were already in effect on February 15th. So I can't overemphasize what a great program this PPP is. I mean, by and large, it's free money. And like I said, I think a lot of your members would probably qualify for at least $20,000, and it's forgivable. They can pay themselves with it. They can pay their landlords. This was one of the reasons it was put in place.
And can you talk a little bit about the fact that since now that people are sort of forced to use home offices or they're working from home, what tax considerations should they be thinking about in terms of planning moving forward?
Well, the home office rules can be tricky from a tax deduction perspective. Typically, it would need to be a principal place of business. However, what might apply in the case of your members is if you use a dedicated space in your home to see clients or patients, that would make the space qualify. And in addition to things that are already deductible, like mortgage interest on your home, for example, rather than going through the detailed calculations of utilities and maintenance and whatnot on the home, the IRS has a simplified method that was put into the law a few years ago, where you can claim up to $1,500 a year. It's actually $5 a foot times however many square feet in your home you use for this workspace or patient meeting area. So there's a 300 square foot maximum. $5 a foot gives you $1,500. So I think if your members qualify, certainly if they meet patients in an area of your home, I think it would be a $1,500 deduction, probably no questions asked. So
that's really good.
Certainly something to talk to your advisor about.
Okay. And Rich, I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts about the CARES program from a banking perspective for our members.
No, I don't. We weren't that involved with it. We weren't an SBA lender, so we didn't.
Okay.
We got involved a little bit, but we didn't do too much with it.
Okay. And then Abbie, before you shift to sort of practice and maybe some conversations around now we're moving from the stay-at-home order to transitioning to opening, I'm curious about some of our members who are close to retirement. What tips, I know you mentioned don't make any rash decisions, but what other tips and strategies would you recommend for people who are balancing what's in their 401k with what's happening in the market and thinking like, do I extend my time working a little longer or how should I plan?
Sure. It's a good question, and I could spend a lot of time talking about it, but I'll try to be succinct here. So first, one other part of the CARES Act that we haven't addressed yet is for those who may still be working, but of the age where they're taking required minimum distributions. So if you recall, up until last year, once you were 70 and a half, you took a distribution from your IRA. It was required. At the end of 2019, the age was extended to 72. But in 2020, you're actually not required to take that distribution at all. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I would also say it doesn't mean you shouldn't. So if your income is lower this year, it may make sense to continue to take your required minimum distribution because you're paying less tax on it. That's a case-by-case scenario. But one thing to keep in mind. The other question that we get from our clients a lot is about Social Security. So I'd say, yes, Social Security has some issues, but for those who are coming close to retirement, we don't feel that you will be impacted by it in the near future. It takes years and years and years for changes to happen there. It's an unpopular thing to change. So nobody wants to take up that cause. So I wouldn't go into retirement thinking Social Security wouldn't be there. For those who are younger, and if you can afford to do so, still invest. Use a dollar cost averaging approach where you can put a little bit of money away every month. March was a scary time in the market for a lot of people, but we've recovered a lot since then. And if you made the decision to get out in March, trying to figure out when to get back in is there's just no way to win that game. So I'd say stay the course, continue to invest, use this time to think about what was comfortable and really uncomfortable to you in the investing standpoint. But don't make any, again, this is not a time to make a rash decision in terms of getting out of the market or going all in the market. It's stay the course, be slow and steady. And I'm just thinking, I was going to turn it back to Joe to think if there's anything I missed on the CARES Act. I know there's a charitable deduction as well. If you want to touch on that, the $300.
Well, yeah, they instituted an above the line $300 charitable contribution deduction, even if you don't itemize deductions, which a lot of people do not, since they doubled the standard deduction starting in 2018. But getting back to retirement plans, something else that I think is very significant in the CARES Act is that you can take an IRA distribution of up to $100,000, up to, you don't have to take that much. That 10% prepayment, early distribution penalty, if you're under age 59 and a half, does not apply this year, as long as you're taking it out for a COVID-related issues such as decreased income. You can pay the tax on the distribution over 3 years. The other thing you can do, though, is you can effectively treat it as a loan, and you have 3 years to put it back into your plan, in which case you're paying yourself. So there's really no interest because you took it out of, it's your own money. And if you put it back in within 3 years, there's no tax on it. So that's certainly a source of capital that your members should consider.
That's really good to know. That's really good to know. And I guess I wonder, as we sort of close, I got two more sort of points to discuss. One is thinking about the challenges we're going through with the transition and reopening. And I'm wanting to know if you have any sort of tips or strategies or things that we should be thinking about, and even our audience members should be thinking about as we transition back to sort of this new normal in terms of the work we're doing, in terms of, I'm thinking about, like you're saying, how do we get back to our workspaces, just in terms of even how to think about just financially, how can we make sure we're going to be sustained during this transition, this period of unknown. So Susan, I'm going to save you for last because I know we're going to lean on you, but Mark, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts that you might want to share as we transition.
Sorry, Daniel, if you said that again.
Yeah, I was just wanting to know, did you have any thoughts that you want to share with our listeners about just transitioning back into this new normal? Anything from, some real estate considerations, that people need to think about, to just everyday life? So any tips that you might want to offer folks?
Well, right now, a lot of clients are obviously coming up with their plans for how they're going to utilize the space. Social distancing still seems to be the thing that's everyone's focused on. So we seem to be moving away from clients packing people in extremely heavily into the space to maximum utilization now to, they're calling it, I think, the 6-foot cubicle all around, which means there's going to be less people in the space. And a lot of clients are thinking about having an A team and a B team, so not everyone's in the office at the same time, so they can mix it up that way. But right now it's all, it's very early days yet in terms of folks getting back to work. And some companies are starting to go back to work. Others have put it off to later in the year, depending on how the virus evolves. So, we're in uncharted waters at the moment. So, if folks are posting their problems, they're not alone. Nobody has the playbook now.
Gotcha. Rich, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really important to, drill down into what you want to accomplish each week, and for me personally, I've got things I want to accomplish with my team. There's things I want to accomplish from a sales perspective, from a training perspective, even, my own personal fitness and personal goals. So, identifying those for the week, really drill down into some process goals for yourself instead of kind of looking at this big picture. I'm like, how am I going to do this? It's start kind of taking a little bit at a time, break down some small targets for yourself and start, chipping away at those.
Okay. Joe, any thoughts that you would like to share?
Well, along the lines of what's already been said, I think, networking, see what others are doing, speak to your colleagues, speak to other members of this association, speak to other tenants in the building. There's been an awful lot of information that you can read about in terms of how businesses are beginning to reopen. So as Rich was just saying, I think it's one day and 1 week at a time. That's really all I can say.
Abbie, any thoughts you would like to share?
Sure. I think it's also a good time, again, to look at all the services you pay for and figure out what you actually need in the office. You've probably spent a lot of time making sure your technology is now up to date. You can do online scheduling. So perhaps you don't need that phone system anymore, or for companies that provide lunch every now and again, that just may not be appropriate these days. So I think it's a really good time to look at where you can cut back or replace where you're cutting back with something you really need now, from maybe a technology standpoint or cleaning supply standpoint, frankly.
Particularly if you can get them.
Right. That's right.
Susan, now from a practice perspective, what thoughts do you have on what you share?
One thing clinicians should think about is obviously getting informed consent for in-person services. And if you need a template for that, we can help you. NJPA and APA has things. And APA has done a nice job of summarizing some guidelines in terms of cleaning your office, testing, coming back. So I would suggest people definitely look at them. And if you need help, you can reach out. And so we have at NJPA, we have members at all stages of their career. And with a nod to our early career psychologists, I mean, this is like such an opportunity for you because you're nimble and you don't have a lot of overhead maybe. And, to think about, you might be more comfortable with technology. So for our early career psychologists to think about how this is going to look going forward and how you can develop your practice in a more nimble way.
That's true. And thank you. And the last point I wanted to kind of touch on is resources. We always like to end on where could we direct people for sort of support or more information. So Abbie, where would you direct listeners for more information?
Sure. So the first is score.org. So that's SCORE.org. It's a not-for-profit that helps small business owners and allows you to mentor with another business owner, and also has lots of resources available on their website on getting back to the office. And then certainly, and not to be self-serving here, but there is a lot of information on our own firm's website about investing and retirement planning. So please use that as a resource too. It's there to educate people. There's lots of webinars there as well. So please feel free to check that out for information as well. Okay.
And what's the website?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's regentatlantic.com.
Okay. All right. I'm Rich. Any resources you would like to let members know about?
And certainly there's plenty of websites about banking, but I really think go out to your network and leverage, those in your network, your professionals who are, willing to make introductions for you. And, LinkedIn is great, and, really reach out for those who are around you who can help you.
Okay. Thank you. Mark, any resources you would like to share with listeners?
Well, I think it's important that people are probably checking in with their business advisor, their accountant, their attorney, their financial planner. These are key people that they need to be speaking to come up with a game plan, not only cash flow wise, but, operationally in terms of how they're going to utilize the space. And again, this is new territory for everyone, and it seems to be, the rules seem to be changing almost on a weekly basis. So it's important that you're reaching out perhaps to these folks on a more regular basis than you have done in the past. And in particular, I think it's important as you go back into the space that you got the right kind of legal agreement set up so that you're covered from a liability point of view as best you can be.
Thank you. And Joe?
Well, I've mentioned the PPP loan several times. The website is just sba.gov for Small Business Administration. We'll get you there, but it's complicated. I would definitely suggest that your members speak to their advisors personally. New Jersey also has a website that's very easy to get to. It's covid19.nj.gov, and there's information there, not only on opening procedures, but you can also access the New Jersey Economic Development Authority there. They have loans available. So there's some good resources on the New Jersey website as well.
Okay. And Dr. Mcgrady, what closing thoughts do you have about resources?
So NJPA, you can reach out for a DPA consult at any time. We have lots of stuff on our website. Now you have this webinar. APA has things, as a team, we're going to get through this together.
I want to say thank you, everybody. I think it's been one for the road, and I want to thank all of our guests. So I want to thank Abbie Rosen for participating, Mark Twentyman, Joseph Graff, Richard Vell, and Dr. Susan Mcgrady. And we're hoping that as you continue to get through this experience, that the biggest lesson learned is to lean on your resources, to tap your network, and to really reach out to the experts, whether it's financial or from a real estate perspective, to help you navigate some of these challenging times. And again, as an association, we'll offer all the practical tips for you and be a resource too. So again, thank you, everybody. Thanks for working through all the clicks and the changes and the clicks and the drops and but we made it through. So I appreciate the person.
Our pleasure.
All right, everybody have a good day. Ming, I think we're good.
Disclaimer. This podcast is intended to provide members of the general public with access to information regarding the potential benefits of psychological treatment. This podcast is not intended as a referral service, an advertisement of services, or a solicitation of business, and is not intended to create a psychologist-patient relationship between any of the podcast participants and the listener. Any individual status as a participant on this podcast does not suggest recommendation of any such individual as a provider of services by NJPA or its affiliates. Thank you for listening to the NJPA Power of the Spoken Word podcast series. Remember that psychologists can provide meaningful insights to improve our understanding of things that matter in life. As experts in human emotions, behavior, and functioning, psychologists work with you to bring you the positive changes you want in your life. Be sure to visit the NJPA website at www.psychologynj.org and follow NJPA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright.